red dots in the corner.
Okay, well, I'll call this study session to order. We have Layla and Christina to catch us up on what's happening with our housing affordability goal.
Okay, well, with that introduction, I'll jump in. Thank you, Mayor Nieva.
I'm sorry, I'm tired.
Oh, good. Then we're in the same place. Well, hello, everyone, counselors, and welcome, Counselor Nicodemus. Did I get that right? Am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, it's nice to see you again. Counselor Nicodemus served on our CET advisory committee, so some of the stuff will be a refresher course for him as well. But the goal of today's meeting today is, so the last time I was here was in October at a study session, and I did a pretty full update on the MHOS itself. So what I'm going to focus on today is really talking with you about your goal, your housing goal. And then I actually have some questions and kind of looking for a little bit of feedback too from you on some of our work plan and priorities to ensure that what we're doing to implement our housing strategy is consistent with your expectations. So, so you won't get the kind of full rundown that I did in October, but Counselor Nicodemus, if you're bored one night and you want a riveting presentation on the last 2 years of housing implementation, I encourage you to go watch that. I'll also send out at the end of this meeting as well, probably tomorrow, Christina has helped me update the matrix. So we have a matrix of every single action in the MHOS, kind of what we've done. Y'all saw that in October. It's not dramatically different, but we did want to update that so that you can look at that and offer any feedback you might have. So I'm going to share my screen. I want to make sure I get the right slideshow. So are you seeing the screen that has the notes?
No.
So it's just the housing goal update, the big, okay. I wish Zoom worked a little differently because it's a little discombobulating at times, so I apologize. Let me just get myself oriented here. Okay. So, okay. So the goals I have for today are to confirm, refresh, or otherwise adjust, should you desire to, your goal statement. So we'll go through that. And then, like I said, providing direction to staff on our work plan. So I also gave you kind of a what's next in October of what we're doing. And so I'm going to dive a little deeper into some of those activities today. And again, some of the questions that have come up since we started working towards implementing those. So just a little background, Council's housing goal really derived itself from our community vision. Council set a goal, so it's one of your 3 goals for housing in 2017. And then after that, we established the housing affordability strategy. And then just in August, you adopted comprehensive plan. So just to remind you, I took this straight from your webpage. So I can see one maybe small change you might want to make, but I'll just, for the benefit of everyone, I'll read it to you. Your goal is, whereas Milwaukee is in a housing state of emergency, I just want you to note that because we actually do have a housing emergency discussion we've been having. And the draft, which is now final, Milwaukee 2040 vision calls for all residents to have affordable housing in Milwaukee and the Portland metro region are currently experiencing record low rental vacancies and extreme housing affordability issues generally, which are causing displacement, disruption of the lives, and in some cases, homelessness. Therefore, the city manager is directed to take every opportunity to address this housing crisis, including finding and working with partners to add new affordable housing units and to encourage the private market to develop housing options that are affordable to Milwaukeeans at every level and stage of life. And from that, we moved to the housing strategy. So my predecessor, Alma Flores, led this work and developed a 5-year action plan, which was adopted by council in July of 2018. The 3 main goals of that housing affordability strategy, as you know, is to develop affordable units, prevent displacements and keep units affordable, and then connecting residents to existing affordable housing. So when we set our work plan goals, they kind of derive from your larger goal to the MHOS and now the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan sort of added another layer of housing goals for us. I just like that chart about Milwaukee's housing spread. So I just threw it in here because it's a nice fact that 66% of our housing is single unit. We're moving away from single family, detached. And we have about a 60% ownership versus renter in the city. But the comp plan really further emphasizes elements of the MHOS and specifically highlights affordability, livability, sustainability, and equity. And some examples of that are promoting middle housing types. Design standards are mentioned quite a lot in there in terms of how do we preserve our tree canopy and create a livable environment for everyone. Access to transportation, talking about services near transit and hubs, and then sustainable design practices, net zero as being values, which are fairly consistent with obviously the city's values. And so it's really those 3 kind of guiding, there 2 are documents, 1 is a statement that really inform how we, as your staff, set the goals that we have for our work plan. And just to get a little bit more in depth in that, I wanted to highlight kind of 5 things, but there are many other things that we're doing in addition to this, but these are kind of the 5 key things that I wanted to talk with you about today and possibly get some feedback on, and the things that we're working on pretty hard right now. So the first is incentives. So the council authorized a number of incentives when you authorized our construction excise tax for the city for both affordable housing and for economic development. We saw what we can do with the economic development funding and leveraged that to give about $250,000 out to our local businesses. The team and I, and that's Christina and I, and then as well, Justin, our city attorney, is involved in this as well, is developing the grant program itself. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. But these incentive programs that you have put in place are going to be big parts of how we leverage additional affordable housing in our city. You also authorized an ADU pilot. Now, you didn't have an affordability requirement for that, but I did want to mention it because that pilot, I'll talk about as well, really worked. We got a lot of, I think we have 6 permitted ADUs in as many months. And so that's a pretty dramatic thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing with respect to land banking and give you some sort of a glimpse into what's coming. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the housing code. Actually, Vera, I believe, will be before council on the 19th to talk about where we're at with the housing code work, but I'm deeply involved in that work and believe that it will address many of the actions in the MHOS as well as in the comprehensive plan. We're going through a lot of changes with that code work, and I think I'm excited to see what comes of it. We're learning a lot. I want to talk a little bit too about our development review process. That also shows its head in our MHOS as well as in the comprehensive plan. And then I'm going to briefly touch on something we've already talked about as a council and staff, which is the temporary housing. And then I want to talk a little bit about transitional housing. This is a study session too. So in normal circumstances, we're around a table. It's a lot more informal. So I do want you to feel free, and I never worry that you don't, but just also always feel free to just chime in, ask questions, stop me from talking at any time if you have any questions. And actually, this might be a good time to pause and say, we've talked a lot about goals. Would it be helpful for the council if I just proceeded and went through some more of the details, and then we can have a discussion? Or would you like for me to pause now and we can go back to your council goal and talk a little bit more in depth about that?
Let's go through the details.
Okay. Onward. So construction excise tax funding. So just as a refresher, we have two pots of money for that. The state statute governs what we can do with the residential pot of money. So just to remind everyone, it's a 1% tax on improvements over $100,000 or new construction for both commercial and residential. The money for residential construction gets put into a separate pot than the commercial. City council set the goals for the commercial pot of money. Half of that is for economic development, and then the other half is for income restricted housing up to 120% of area median income. We have a bit more flexibility with that pot of money because council set those requirements. And so we are able to say fund things like if we chose an ADU through that program, whereas the residential pot of money is set by state statute and it requires it be a multifamily. And multifamily, just to remind everyone from the state, is defined as 3 or more units with that are attached. So that funding source has to be used for things that are 3 or more units or larger. Just to give folks a sense of where we are in terms of how much money we have, we're tracking at about $400,000 at the moment. And so we'll be starting the program with a fairly large chunk of money, but we anticipate and estimate about $100,000 a year total for CET. And that's just based on the past couple of years, and then some conservative projections that we've made given the kind of economic climate that we're in. I will note that we look at what was projected versus actuals as of now, so about 7 months into the fiscal year. We're tracking pretty close. We're at about 85% of what we estimated for the residential funding, quite a bit behind in terms of the commercial. So we're at about 22% of what we estimated, but we are expecting so multifamily actually gets categorized under commercial, and we just got a building permit submitted for the Monroe Street Apartments last week, which is a 238 unit project. And so we're expecting to see some some CET funding and come into the pot from that application once it's complete and paid for. So I'm feeling good about where we're tracking with respect to our estimates at this time. But the point is that we can estimate after the program is launched at about 100,000 or so a year that can go out in grants. And one of the key things that staff are currently working on is compliance. And the reason for that is that we anticipate that these grants are going to be smaller developers. They're not going to be funded through the low-income housing tax credit program, which has compliance through housing and urban development. So I think some of our council knows that we did try to work with the county to develop a compliance and monitoring system, and that did not work out. So we reached out to a nonprofit and we're tracking down the road with them, and they had some capacity issues. So we found a contractor through that nonprofit that actually wrote the state's manual on compliance. And so even though we've had a couple of hiccups, we've been able to really stay the course, and I am expecting a draft of that manual at the end of the month. So we're really excited about that. It's super nerdy, but it's so important because when we do grants like this, we have to be able to monitor and track what's happening. And that's just not something that we've done in the past. So we have actually had to build this from nothing. So I'm excited for that. I feel very confident in the contractor we've selected for that. She's got a great deal of experience, and I think both Christina and I have learned a great deal in that process and probably will continue to.
Question.
Yeah, of course, please.
I just know that in conversations with some of my peers around the county and in the region, that the construction excise tax is still kind of seen as this new wacky thing. So I know that some other cities have adopted it, but not all. And the fact that you're building from scratch this particular evaluation tool makes me wonder if there's anything we can do as electeds to help inform other cities and jurisdictions about the work that's been done here, and kind of help spur the use of this as a tool to promote and build affordable housing in the region.
Yeah, and I think Councillor Heisey, once we have this up and running, we will have a lot of lessons learned. And I, as a public sector practitioner, appreciate when others share with me what they learned to help other cities get ahead a little faster. And I appreciate you noting that we're building a lot of this from scratch. It is kind of wacky. And so we're having to figure it out as we go. And I know we'll get there, but yeah, I definitely would be open to sharing that with peer cities for sure, or providing council with resources to do that yourselves.
Yeah, I'm not trying to create more work for you.
Oh, no.
Just to be clear.
I had a couple of clarification questions.
Sure.
You talked about 100,000 a year, and I thought you meant coming in, but then you said something about in grants. So do you mean both coming in and going out, or?
Yeah, so I'm anticipating, yes. So we have about 400 as our starting fund balance for the beginning of this fiscal year. And yeah, I'm estimating about 100 coming in, and I would think balanced with that 400K, I'd like to see us getting out about 100,000 a year, assuming that continues. We'll obviously has to adjust if we have less, and if we for some reason get a lot more, we can cross that bridge. But does that clarify it, Councillor Beatty?
Yeah. And so the other question was, you mentioned Monroe Apartments, and there's the 32nd Street apartment building. At what point does a developer pay the CET? When they pull their permits, or later, like at certificate of occupancy or something?
That's a great question. So they pay it before they get their permit issued.
Okay.
So we'll get it when they get their building permit.
Okay.
So that's the nice thing, is that we should be seeing those funds come in this fiscal year.
And the commercial is coming from commercial projects?
Yes, and the way that it's broken down is so multifamily, and especially mixed use multifamily, falls into what is considered the commercial code. So it's based on the building code. So yes, so yeah, it would be, if someone built a new pharmacy or any kind of mixed use would fall into the commercial pot of money.
Thank you.
Ayla, I have a question for you about the definition. So the definition, was that part of the bill on, for where the housing, where the dollars, the first batch of money we're talking about,
Yeah.
where those must be spent per the law. Was that definition, I mean, I assume that that definition sits inside of that Senate bill, whatever it was, 1533. Do you have any idea whether they're planning on updating that now that we also have a middle housing definition that includes units of 3 or actually up to 4?
Yeah, so the answer is I don't know. And I've asked the question and we will continue to ask the question. What I'm hearing is that, yeah, they're talking about that. So thank you for bringing it up again and reminding us. I will see if we can get a better answer than that. Now that the model code's been adopted, my hope is that the state will start looking at these kinds of things. We'll set our program up to be flexible such that if that changes, we can adjust to that. But that's a great point, and I think it's something that we can look into a little more. And if we need a little political help, we might look to you to help us with that.
Sure. I just want to make sure that, I like your answer about making sure it's flexible so that we're not in the same situation. I'd rather us not have to come back. I'd rather just be able to continue to comply without having a whole hearing on how to change a simple, code thing.
Speaking right to my heart there. That's great. Okay. Right. So we have some money to start with. The other thing, I don't have a slide for it. I didn't mention it, but I do want to mention it here as well. And most of you are aware of this, but we also have a construction excise tax exemption. And this was an exemption that council passed. A developer would have to demonstrate that they are, that their CET, their tax can be waived if they are providing housing that's affordable to people earning 80% of area median income for 30 years and can demonstrate that the CET that is waived is about 50% of what projected revenue would be lost over that 30 years. So we're basically saying if you have a CET of $500,000 and you want to offer a handful of units that are affordable at 80% of AMI, then you need to demonstrate over that 30 years that there has been $1 million in lost revenue over that period. And that acknowledges time value of money, that 500 grand today is worth a heck of a lot more than kind of $1 million stretched out over 30 years. So we have one project that will likely be using that, and that's the Coho Point at Kellogg Creek project at this stage. But the intent of that was to try to get folks that are coming in and building market rate housing and that maybe don't have much of an interest in doing affordable housing, that this might be one way that the city could leverage at least a few units out of it. So we'll see how that works. And what we're working on with that is having a third party evaluate those applications so as to put some truth and objectivity behind that analysis. And so if a developer applies for that, they're going to have to share aspects of their pro forma, and then we will have a real estate expert evaluate that in the context of the current market in order to make a determination of whether or not they hit the metric that council set for that. So that's the other piece of the construction excise tax. And just to remind folks, Councilor Nicodemus will remember this, but we set program criteria for that. We have requirements and we also have preferred criteria as well. These will be the things, so just to remind you as well, is that staff will be we will be evaluating applications and then making decisions and making awards, which is why I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about some of the questions I have as we move towards implementing this. But just to remind folks, the requirements are the project is ready. So we're looking for projects that are at least have some amount of schematic design, hopefully design development, at the point where they want to apply for a land use application, and that there is some demonstrated financial need, as sort of the but-for test. the criteria is that we're really looking to fund missing middle housing. And so as I've mentioned, the residential pot of money can only fund certain types of missing middle. So we expect that some of that may go to multifamily housing. The committee set a minimum of 5 years as a guaranteed for that income restriction affordability period. And that can be up to 80% in that residential pot or up to 120% in the commercial pot. There is a preference for projects located near public transit. And then serving underserved populations or organizations that aim to affirmatively further fair housing. Some other things that have come up in conversations with council and then with the CET group too is just being cognizant of unit size. And we know we have a real strong need in this community for larger units. And so those would be some of the criteria that staff would be looking at when we evaluate applications. So what we're working on, as I mentioned earlier, is compliance and monitoring. So that's a big part of this. We really have to understand how we're going to be paying attention to these things as they move forward. The other piece of it is we have to develop a grant agreement. So we'll be giving money and we're actually asking for something from that. We're asking for affordability. And so we need some sort of legal instrument with the applicant in order to document that. And so we're working with the city attorney. We have a draft grant agreement, but in discussions around that, we got pretty deep into what beyond a grant agreement do we need? And our discussions were around the amount of the award. So depending on how big the award is, kind of leads itself to what kind of legal instruments should we be using. So an example would be, let's say we decided to cover the city's SDC fees for a project and they're about $5,000. We would probably just execute a grant agreement, which would include requiring them to be compliant. And then we would do our compliance and monitoring for that 5 years, and then we would be done with it. Larger grants, we think that we really need to think a little bit more about recording something on the property. So larger grants to me would be something in the range of, is above $5,000, probably in the 5-figure range. And what that would mean is we need to develop an instrument that we record onto the property so that we are securing our investment. So an example would be, I'm just throwing numbers out there. Say we gave a project, a duplex was going to be 60% affordable. We negotiated a 10-year term and we agreed to give them $50,000. It's totally hypothetical. I want to know that if that property sells in that 10 years, that those units are still affordable. And the only way to do that is to record an easement on that property or a covenant. And so that's part of what we're trying to figure out is at what level do we need to record that as that covenant? And how are we scaling the size of these grants? And then finally, we're working through a process of how we will administer the grants. They'll likely be on a reimbursement basis, depending on the size of that grant. A smaller grant likely will just be paid up front. But there's all these sort of nuances we have to kind of work through and figure out. And so, one of my key questions for council was in thinking about, this world where we would have maybe about 100, let's say to 150,000 a year for this program. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, do we spread it out with as many little ones as we can get? Or does council have an interest in maybe putting more resources towards fewer projects to leverage longer term affordability? Because those are the trade-offs that as staff that we're going to have to be faced with. And I would really love to get your just candid feedback on kind of what you see and what you hope for this program to achieve. I think we can achieve a lot either side of it. It could be a mix of both. But as I move to being the one that's going to be approving these, it would be really helpful for me to hear from you either now or at a later date about what your thoughts are on that, because those are the things that we're wrestling with. And that will help us figure out, okay, we need to create 2 kinds of grant agreements. And that starts to help us kind of whittle our path down a little bit, because it's been really big and we've gotten it a little bit more narrow. So that's one question that I had, and I'm happy to stop. And
I would like to respond to that one. My inclination is that we get as much housing as fast as possible. My hope is that at some point, the state, the federal government, blah, 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 will engage in this, and there will be more affordable housing long-term. Perhaps even wages will be increased so that it's not as desperate a need, but right now it's a desperate need. And we know that for a fact. That's what we do know. And so my strong preference is to get as much as fast as possible.
And I would echo that. I would add, I think the landscape is changing rapidly in the next 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
We have, in July of this year of 2021, $21 million from the Here Together Metro Bond will become available in Clackamas County to do wraparound services and to do affordable housing for very low income individuals in the county. Maybe some of that will be spent in Milwaukee. That remains to be seen. We have hundreds of units that could potentially be coming online in the next 3 to 5 years, possibly 10. We don't know what the timeline is for Hillside. Providence has a 60 unit, very low income residential housing complex that they want to build right next to the hospital. We have Coho. So we have a lot of things in the pipeline is what I'm trying to say. I don't have a clear sense of what of our different options of, if we do incentivize smaller units here and there, if we focus on kind of how do we get middle housing that really mixes in more affordable housing in our residential areas, which are dominated by single family or single unit residences right now. Is that going to get us what the mayor has identified, or are we better off with a different approach? And how is that going to change in the next 3 to 5 years as we see the 2 programs, the 2 different Metro bonds really start to become regional players, and as we see that transform, I don't know. It feels like a really messy time. So I guess I would just say it's a messy time and things may change. And I know that you all have been very good at being nimble and responsive. And I think I would just ask that we continue to be that way and kind of say, well, this seems to be working, this not so much. And that we revisit things so that we keep moving forward.
Yeah, I guess I might chime in with, this is comparatively a pretty, these are sort of smaller buckets of money than sort of these bigger regional and other programs that might become available. And so, especially sort of like in the infill type, arena, we're talking about smaller, we're kind of talking about smaller development, opportunities. So maybe I might consider like that this is maybe small stuff, like small local money to be spent hyper locally. Thinking that there's, an opportunity here for, fellow Milwaukeeans who might not be developers, to sort of tap into and to help create affordable housing units in our neighborhoods. But so I'm not sure does that go toward toward an answer to you at all? Or, I guess I don't know if that means
I think that's in line with, as many units as possible throughout the city, but also because they're not, I'm not talking about necessarily professional developers, leveraging this money, that it might not mean as many rapidly, units coming on as fast as possible. So there might be a conflict there with some of the other goals that have been stated.
Yeah, I think that is helpful. And I think that what you've described is actually what I hope for the project, which it is Milwaukeeans or local folks. It's sort of one of the goals that we had when I worked for the Metro Transit Oriented Development Program was to develop developers. And so part of it too is I think part of our goal and what we've been trying to do with housing, and I think our reputation is starting to be this is a place where we want affordable housing and we want unconstricted housing. And our council, I think, has taken many steps in order to achieve that. So that is helpful because the program really is geared towards that. And so what that feedback gives me is that, say I'm presented with kind of 2 applications, and one's for sort of a large multifamily thing, or I could do 5 smaller scale projects. That gives me a place to turn and say, you know what, I'm going to go closer to that 5 smaller scale projects as opposed to a larger type of thing.
Well, I mean, that seems like what you said, our goal was for middle housing. So, I mean, that seems totally consistent with that. That doesn't really answer the question of term, though, right?
Right.
Whether you're doing smaller grants and shorter terms or bigger grants and longer terms. And I guess on that question, I think I don't have a strong feeling either way. My inclination was to ask you which is more consuming of staff time. I mean, I think the point's good that that there's a lot in play the next 3 to 5 years. And so maybe we should go with the shorter terms for now, but we might want to revisit that in a couple of years when more things are coming online and start thinking about the longer term, because we also don't want a bubble of things that all expire in 2027 and then we're like they're all popping to higher rents or whatever. So I mean, I think again, like the point that Councilor Heisey made about being nimble. I mean, how you start this program in the next year or 2 years may not be the right answer for 2024. Right.
I love that answer because it's exactly right. And I think it's a healthy way to look at it, especially because we've never done this before. And I know that my team just seems to be famous for doing things that we've never done before. And then once we're done with them, we're like, oh, we should have done it this way, or we did that great, and we should do this better. So perhaps what we can do is we check in, have an annual check-in with you so I think once we commence the program, at that point, we will do an annual check-in and evaluate that. And if we're finding that in a year or 2 that things are shifting and we need to rethink our approach, we have the flexibility, I think, to do that the way that the program is designed, that there's flexibility there. And I really like the idea of just let's give this a try. And we may learn. I think that, to answer your question, Councilor Beatty, less is better for staff. So the less applications, a $5,000 application is really no different than a $100,000 application in many ways. But I think if we're open to just exploring what comes in the door and seeing how that works out and then evaluating that will probably be the best indication of what makes the most sense. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any real strong feelings either way so that we could make sure that we were delivering that. But it sounds like there's an openness to experimentation to a certain extent. And I'm comfortable with that. I kind of operate in that kind of world anyway, even though I like to have rules and stuff that often need to get changed eventually anyway. And I think that that's actually good governance, because you're saying, oh, that didn't work, so let's do it this way, or that worked too well. Let's tamp it down or whatnot. So I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
Layla, could you remind me when we have our next MHAS update? Because that seems like a really good inflection point for revisiting this kind of.
Yeah, we did it in October, so it's usually in the fall.
Mhm.
So we can do it then.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I see, Christina, you can add that to the list. Okay. All right, great. Well, that's really helpful feedback. So thank you. And always, we only get to see each other occasionally, you know, in a box. And so for those, especially Counselor Nicodemus, you're new, feel free to reach out if you have ideas, questions, thoughts. We're here for you. Our job is to make you look good, among other things. Oh, so we talked about this a little bit already. So it sounds like we're there, middle housing. We also have, you know, some of these resources can be used for rehabilitation as well. And so I'm hoping to see that we'll get some of those applications as well. Are there any other thoughts or points that folks want to make, Counselor Heisey?
Regarding rehab on multifamily housing, I know that there's always that tension with naturally affordable housing that if you improve it, is it going to cross the line to where it becomes less affordable?
Mm-hmm.
Are there provisions in how these funds are used that can kind of help mitigate that and keep that from happening, or?
Yeah, yes, because any project that would receive funding would have to have an income restriction on the units. So yes, we could, you know, if we gave a grant to someone to rehabilitate a sixplex or something, they would be required at a minimum to be at 80% of area median income. And then that's where that legal instrument I talked about, there would be an easement or something recorded onto the property to ensure that that took place. And then we would be doing compliance monitoring after that.
Mm-hmm. So I know we just said get as many units going as we can, but I will also note that when you have that kind of natural affordable housing and it's really falling apart, that people can be living in hazardous conditions. So I guess I would just provide some direction that if you see something like that coming in, that's important. Or if it's a property that looks like it's falling apart and it may be that the owner is more interested in just offloading it than continuing to deal with it, then I think those would both be important considerations in the mix, because those units are so essential. They provide so much stability, and I kind of worry at times that we've been really focused on getting new development going for good reason, but wondering if we're really doing enough to preserve those naturally occurring, more affordable units. So things to think about.
I definitely second that. I think that that's the focus there should, you know, certainly be to prevent those units from falling into, you know, expensive market rate, just sort of classic gentrification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's at the forefront of my mind as well. And just kind of going through these documents again. And that's something that comes up in the MHAS, it comes up in the comprehensive plan, it comes up in my mind, and it comes up in yours as well. And so those are things that when we get to the marketing phase of this, we can be reaching out to folks that we know that own properties. Another thing I've actually also done is I think our building official will be the 19th. I feel like the 19th is like the community development show. It's going to be a very exciting night for you next week. But Samantha will be talking about the dangerous building code. And one of the things we talked about with that too is if there is some deferred maintenance or safety issues, that those would be folks that maybe she should direct to this program once it's up and running. So I appreciate that feedback, and I hear you. Okay, so just the ADU waiver pilot. I just wanted to talk about this in the context of was a wildly successful pilot. And we've actually had a couple more reach final approval since we talked in October. We have 6 that have received their approvals and 4 that are still pending. 6 of those required frontage improvement waivers. And I think that that was a really big part of it. Waivers, fee reductions, all those kinds of things are both in the MHOS and in the comprehensive plan. I believe we're scheduled to have a discussion with other departments about those kinds of charges. I think it's something that we need to have. All of you probably would agree. I just saw Ann pop in here too, that's a discussion we need to have with you, with all of the departments. But it is certainly something that that we are engaged with Ann on and the rest of the team.
And that conversation is happening the first meeting in March.
Thanks. So more on that when we get to it, but I did just want to highlight how well this seems to have worked. And we're tracking it. We're like waiting for people to break ground. And so we'll be paying attention to this stuff and maybe taking pictures and bringing them. Land banking. So this is a huge part of what we're doing. It feels really slow, and then all of a sudden you'll have 200 housing units built. But for right now, a big part of what my team is focusing on is Coho Point at Kellogg Creek and Sparrow. Coho Point is, as everyone knows, is a city, it's a public-private partnership. It is primarily market rate, but there will be 20 units. There'll be 10% of units, which will be approximately 20 if it's a 200 unit project, or 23 bedrooms. We haven't yet negotiated which of those it will be, of housing affordable to folks at 80% for a period of 30 years. And so this will be a unique project. It will be pilot testing the CET exemption process on this. And so I intend to come back to you once we have that sorted, just to share with you the methodology and how we evaluated that project. We expect that Coho will be submitting for their land use. I'm just going to say real soon, imminent, is coming. So that's very exciting. For all of us who've been on that ride for the last 3.5 years. So we're really excited about that. Sparrow is also a big part of our work plan for the year. We've already started working on that. We'll be talking with you in more detail next week on the 19th to have a discussion with you about looking back at the goals we set. I think it was last March we set goals, and then this COVID thing happened. So we just want to come back to that, and there might be some different thinking now. And so we want to acknowledge that and potentially update those goals. But we are actually starting to work on that, and I'll talk a little bit more next week about that, but doing some preliminary site work that in terms of access, and I can talk more about that next week. But those are the big projects we're doing with respect to the city kind of playing some level of developer. I also want to point out that Community Land Trust pops up a lot in our MHOS. It also pops up in our comp plan. And Sparrow is a site in which I think I've heard this council express that would be an ideal opportunity for a land trust. And so we'll be looking at that as a potential model. There are a number of ways that we could do that, but that's front of mind for us. So does anyone have any questions about either Coho or Sparrow? All right, I'll keep going.
And just to ask real quick, is that the first time we're seeing these drawings or
Oh, how nice of you to notice. Yes, these are the most recent designs. They'll be submitted as part of the land use application, but they showed them at the pre-app and at Historic Milwaukee, so I figured y'all could see them too. But I'm super pleased with how the design has come out. It's a tremendous shift from what it started. And a lot of discussion has gone into this. So yeah, that's the most recent renderings of the site.
Just so I'm aware, what level of involvement can council anticipate possibly? Like what level are we talking about here?
Like this much maybe at this point.
No, I just mean once, if this was shown to downtown, there might be folks really anxious to talk to us about it, and I want to know whether or not it's likely to come up to us on appeal.
This is planning commission questions.
Yeah, I think we should just assume and we just sort of go with it. So I think there's no harm in seeing a picture that's public. Everyone else will see, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But thank you for asking. If Justin were here, he'd be like ex parte contact or something. And so I'll just embody him like, this is a picture, it's good. It's what it kind of looks like. So, but we did get positive feedback at the Historic Milwaukee NDA. That's all I'll say there. So housing code work, that's in process. It's really tracking along, really impressed with both our consultant team and especially our project management team. Vera and Laura, our new planning manager, just been doing an outstanding job. I'm pretty deeply involved in that, for better or for worse, but it's important enough and it crosses over with my work as well in terms of the housing. So really staying on top of that. The other thing that's come up, and it's also noted in the MHOS and in the comp plan, but is this idea of, and I have a very high level of customer service expectation of my team. I would say that the planning and building divisions are just exceptional in terms of the service that we provide to the community. But what this is really talking about is we started having some internal conversations prior to COVID and then after about what an expedited permitting process looks like for both land use and for building. Because we kind of have the two separate processes. You go through the land use process and then you can do them concurrent, but then you go through the building process. We worked with building to actually develop a process to do expedited permit review for affordable housing. We've had preliminary conversations with some of the other departments as well, but this would also mean that we would put projects that came in before behind. And so I feel like that and some other management folks I've worked with on this felt that it would be important to ask council to weigh in on this because we would be our typical queue in the building division, for example, is 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. I had to wait when we were putting the library through, just like everybody else. But this would change that. This would change that in the sense that if we have certain statutory requirements for planning review, but it would mean that if we can work it, that we would move affordable housing to the front of that list of that review. And the same would be true for building. But that does mean that other people are going to be possibly waiting a little longer. And so I wanted to throw that out there to council and hear what your thoughts were on that and whether you would support us advancing that internally, because I think it's something that we can do fairly easily. And it's just yet another way that we show the development community, the affordable housing development community, that we are literally putting them first. So I wanted to hear from council on this and see what your thoughts were.
So just to clarify, you would mean something where it's where there is a compliance aspect about its affordability, not just I say I'm building
Yeah.
affordable.
Yeah. No, great question. That's actually one of the detailed questions that came up when we were talking about the process. But yes, it would probably need to be a LIHTC project, a project that got funding from the city, that has an affordability component. So they would have to be income restricted units, and they would have to be able to demonstrate that.
Just to give us a sense of sort of the lay of the field, where are we right now vis-a-vis the rest of the metro region in our process? Are we longer? Are we shorter? Are we about the same?
Well, I know we're better than Portland,
Yes.
because I hear that all the time from developers. No offense to Portland. What I hear anecdotally is that in terms of like our land use review and even our building review process, we're pretty quick relative to other cities. But we track sort of, I think, we're not slow and then we're not super fast because we're busy, not because our building or planning staff are not efficient. They're the busiest, most efficient people I know. There's just a lot of demand. So I think given the demand, we're nailing it. But relative to other places, and just with the workload, we're probably running about average.
And what is that?
For building review, it's about 6 to 8 weeks. I know that our planners, we have 120 days to review applications and get through the whole process. Just to give you a sense, Laura's been working with her team to put together kind of a process of like how long it takes to get through the process for each type of application. And we're trying to do it a lot quicker. So like type 1, we're trying to do within 50 days, type 2, et cetera. So the team's been working through that.
And the affordable housing, I mean, by the time people come in for permits, they obviously have their funding, right? So
yeah, they should.
So there's no question that we're holding, everybody up if we're, taking longer to review. But in the land use piece of it, aren't affordable housing people often still putting their financing together or not?
It depends. I mean, I think that's a great point. I mean, typically when you're submitting for land use, you don't have your debt secured. You're not, you don't have all of those things in place. You typically wait till it's issued and then you can go and get your funding, or you're working through your funding at that time. The building permit review process, if folks aren't on it and submitting their stuff and getting things in, that can usually be what the lag time is because folks are like, I just submitted, can you review it today? It's like, we've got 8 weeks of other things ahead of you, so we'll do it as soon as we can. Sam often, not exceeds that deadline, but like she exceeds her own, like she does it sooner than that usually. Not being very articulate, but hopefully you get my meaning.
Well, I think this is an important goal. We have, so many people that are spending way more of their income than they can afford on housing. We have people that are homeless. We have all the issues. So again, the sooner we can get more housing built that's affordable, the better. So faster in every way. I mean, if it starts to become an issue where we're, it's twice as long now to get your land use or your permit process on a normal project, then we should probably have that conversation. But
well, and I was just going to suggest, is there a backstop we can put on this? You all would know better than we can what that might be, or whether that's something we can consider. But I mean, it seems like there should be a point at which, it can't continue to be pushed back. Like,
yeah, and with the land use side of it, the 120 days really governs that. So like an example would be is if you got a an application for an affordable housing project, and there are a handful of applicants that are still waiting for a decision, and they're within that kind of last quarter of their 120 days, clearly we need to meet that statutory requirement before we jump into something new. But what I'm hearing is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's an appetite to do it, being cognizant that if it starts holding up other things, that we may need to reevaluate at that time. I think Christina has done a great deal of work already with the building division on permit review. That would be something that we could probably do in pretty short order. And then we could just see how that piece of it works. And then if that's working, we could then talk about how it might be translated into our land use process. And the reason why I'm not pushing super hard on the land use process is because there's already kind of a statutory timeline associated with that. But this would just change both buildings, and then, engineering and planning also have to do development review on those once before they're issued. So, but we felt as staff that it was an important question to ask of council, because it does affect how we're serving people.
I'm sitting here thinking, is there, and you're better situated to answer this than I am, Layla, but I'm trying to picture scenarios where we would want to make sure that something was moving along a pace, even if it did not include affordable units, and I don't know if that would be something really cool and innovative in the innovation area, or if there's something that might come up in an opportunity site, or if we had a really great opportunity somewhere in downtown in the urban renewal area. And in all, not the industrial area, but in those other two scenarios, I feel like we would hope that we would get some affordable units in the mix. So this is just me asking really long. Am I thinking about this right? Can you think of anything, any scenario where we'd go, gosh, we really want that to happen ASAP? And if we're not helping it move quickly, that could hurt its chances of success.
Some of the priorities of the city are not just housing. So I will do this here. One is there is an application that we're expecting. I won't go into details about that application, but there's an application we're expecting that I think is of special interest to this community in our industrial area and in our commercial zones. I think that there could be, and we are doing this, so I'm going to just out us as doing this too, solar installations, where we need to get them inspected, and we're trying to make sure that we're also prioritizing that, because it has been an issue in the past where the developer needs to get in and get out on a specific date, and we're trying to make sure that we're helping expedite that for another council goal. So I think those are the two that come to mind for me. But in the past, a city library or a city or a school district school that's having a really hard time getting through a process. So there are definitely things out there that are priorities for us that aren't just housing. I can't think of any in the coming few years where they would be so put off by this process that it would be that big of a deal. But I just transparently, there are definitely things you all care about that aren't only housing approvals.
What Ann said. And the nice thing is, a lot of those come through us either way, because we do economic development too. We're kind of on the sort of front end of those things. We just have, our team communicates really well. And so we know when there's something, we try to stick to that 6 to 8 weeks just for equity and keep things rolling along. But there are times when we have to intervene in some way. The other thing I would add too, and this was a goal in the MHOS as well, but just as sort of this customer service support aspect of what we do. So, Christina did like a ton of support for folks who applied for the ADU program. Allison and myself do a lot of outreach directly to folks that are, we attend interesting pre-application meetings and meet the folks that are involved and just really try to get ourselves not involved just so we know, but so that we can foster a relationship and help those folks through the process. There's a couple tricks of the trade I learned running permits through when I was managing the library. So Sam says I can share those, and so I do. But that's part of how we would address that, I think, as well.
So have we kind of established demarcation of what we mean by affordable in this realm of putting things to the front of on the top of the stack, as it were? Like, is workforce housing, for example, considered affordable?
Yeah, we haven't. And if you would like to, you most certainly can. And that's part of what we want to talk about today. Is it the 80 to 120%, or is it, if you want to add something like?
I think we need, one way or the other to establish what we mean by the policy. And to include workforce housing, since that is actually a really huge need in this, in this city and in the region. And there's a couple of projects that are in the early stages that will be really cool if we can make them happen.
Yeah, I agree. So it'd be sort of 80% or below.
What is workforce considered? Is that the 80 to 120? Is that?
It depends, but yeah, I've heard between 60 to 120 and 80 to 120. I think my suggestion would be to use 80 at this point and see where it gets us, because it starts to get a little sticky when we start getting into market rate. And I think we recall from last time, Milwaukee is about 80% of AMI. Our median family income is 80% of AMI. So just based on your conversation last time, which I rewatched before this meeting, I would think that probably 80% would be a good starting point and lower. And if we have way, like, all kinds of demand, then we win because we're getting housing. But we may need to reevaluate the process so that I'm not killing my staff. But
Or staff up.
Or I would welcome that any day. But Anne just popped.
I knew
on.
Anne would turn on everything.
That
I think the other piece is
problem to have. So
we also want to make sure that we're prioritizing the right things. And one of the things I have run into historically when I have done something like this around a policy where it expedites you to the front of the line is that you end up with a lot of applications that qualify, which is a good problem for us to have. So I think that it's probably just something where I'd recommend we decide this here, that we would step it back if we start seeing that nobody's actually prioritized because everybody's qualifying. And we just keep stepping it back to the point that the lowest income restricted housing is the stuff that is moving to the front of the line if other things are coming in at a really good clip. Does that work for everyone?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, that's smart. So am I hearing we're good with giving this a shot, 80%, and should we stay focused on the building permit review as a starting point and then discuss again and see how this looks in terms of the land use side of it? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. Well, I'll go back and explore that with staff and we'll keep you posted. All right. So the next slide, now I'm going to say this is one table, but I wanted to share it because I found it. I read the Housing Authority of Clackamas County's local implementation strategy. Because we talk a lot about units, and I was trying to figure out what is our need, and our housing need analysis doesn't really break things down in the same way. And so I just want to caveat first that this is just an assumption, it's an estimate. And I typically look at estimates like this as a floor, not a ceiling. But I do think it gives us a good sense of, we've just been talking a lot about MFI and who are we serving? And so I just thought it would be helpful, hopefully helpful and not distracting, to see kind of what the county estimates are for our city over the next 30 years. And so that's what you see here before you. And again, I think of it as a floor, not a ceiling, but just as a starting point for discussion. I wanted to highlight, I reached out to the folks that are from the county working on Hillside. They received their completeness letter yesterday. So their application has been deemed complete and is now in the land use process. So that's great for their preliminary plan development. At full build out, they're going to have a mix of units, 80% or below. But what she told me is that the total, assuming 300 new units are built, that would cover about 43% of this need over the next 20 years. And I just want to highlight too that we have quite a few other things kind of coming in. We're expecting about 20 units or so from Coho. Certainly Sparrow. Right now, current zoning, we're thinking about 12. It could be more than that, but I don't know. But 12 is a good conservative estimate. At some point in the next couple of years, when we develop the property across the street from City Hall, Harrison and Main with Metro, you all set pretty strong goals for that. I imagine we're going to be revisiting those and refreshing them as well. But, a very conservative estimate of income restricted housing on there could be 100 units. So you start to get, just with those few projects, to about 60% of that need. And so I wanted to point that out because I wanted to just show you how much income restricted housing is coming in. What I haven't shown you is how much just market rate housing has come in because of the incentives that you all put in place. The vertical housing tax zone, I think, has been a major part of why we're seeing a lot of multifamily housing. The 10-year tax abatement is kind of a big deal. We'll appreciate it a lot more in 10 years when those property taxes are on the tax rolls and we're getting tax increment from it. But I think the goal of it was to build units, and we did. There's 100 units, 14 units in Axletree that were built. The Monroe Street Apartments is using the vertical housing tax zone. So that's 238 units that we expect to start construction in months. So we're delivering units, and we don't often take time to really celebrate that. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted you to acknowledge that you've helped do that. So I think the way that I look at this is that how do we start to meet this demand? And outside of the projects I've mentioned, that's about 18 units a year, if we're going to talk about it in years over the next 20 years. I think it's a really realistic goal. I think that the policies and the programs that you all have put in place have set the stage for this. And so it doesn't mean that we sit back and be idle and hope for the best. I just wanted to note that we've made and will make quite a bit of headway towards meeting this goal. I think we will exceed this goal in 30 years. But I just wanted to acknowledge that. I needed some metric to be like, are we even close to delivering what we need? And this helped me, but like I said, I see it as a floor. We can always do more. There's never, in my opinion, too much affordable housing, unless it's like really bad all in one spot and nobody's paying. That's terrible. We don't want that. That's not what we're promoting. So I wanted to share that with all of you. Be proud.
And I really appreciate that, Layla. And, particularly the 18 units a year number, because that, when you look at that hundreds of units that are coming on in the next 3 to 5 years, I guess more like 7 if you include all of Hillside, but, and then say, okay, we're getting 60% of the way there in the first 5 to 7 years. And that means once you get past that, we're looking at 18 units a year. that falls into a realm where something like middle housing could actually help us. It could significantly move us in the direction we need to go. So that's really exciting. And highlights the value of the work we're doing around middle housing as really being someplace where we'll make a difference. And we'll make it slowly, and it won't be dramatic, and it'll just be incorporated into our neighborhoods. So I really love that. So thanks for this breakdown. I think it's really useful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's actually what occurred to me too, is that it'd be 18 per year for all 20 years, but in addition, I think about just the CET program we just discussed. If we're able to leverage 4 or 5 units a year, I mean, that's just us as the city. I keep getting calls from people at Reach and other places like, hey, what about this? Or, hey, what about this? Allison just got a call from someone at Beam Development. They're interested in coming and looking at affordable housing here. So I think even if we're not the ones building it, we are setting the stage and making Milwaukee a welcome place for it to be built. So, okay. So the last thing I'll hit on, and you're going to talk a lot about this next week too, but I just wanted you to know that we're working on this and thinking about it. And I actually want to get some feedback. So we talked about the temporary use code. I don't want to go into too much detail unless you would like, but I really need Samantha here, I think, for some of that conversation. And so if it pleased the council, I would defer that conversation to when we meet next week. We believe we've addressed all of the concerns. I know there might still be some outstanding questions or concerns, and so I want to honor that and have a full conversation with you about that on Tuesday next week. But just high level, the way that I've been looking at temporary and transitional housing is sort of 2 pieces. So the first being this temporary use code. So it's a quick action permit that we are able to sign and get going and to respond to an emergency need. An example is that during the wildfires on my daughter's birthday, which was a Saturday, I signed a permit for this to make sure that that shelter could get set up that day. And so that's the level of customer service that we expect with this kind of permit, that we're able to just turn it around. We've also been talking quite a lot. We started a lot of this conversation prior to COVID as well about transitional housing. And what I mean by transitional housing, I think, is something that is of interest and of passionate interest to some of you, which is sort of sheltering and how does that work? We have a shelter in our town, which is the Annie Ross House. We have a process for shelters, which is through our community service use. And staff have identified some places that through the years where we've gotten certain requests and we've tried to respond to those, where we could clarify some of the language in the CSU code. It can be a little confusing, and it can be much like what we're trying to address with the temporary use code, is just to make it clear and to make it obvious. The thing I like about the CSU process is that it's an involved process. There's quite a bit of engagement around it. But I think when you're proposing something like this that has impacts, that it's important to be thoughtful as we move through that. So the CSU process is set up for things like longer term shelters, permanent transitional shelters, but there's some things in it that we think could be improved. And so my thinking was, when we separated these out, was that we, it's just going to probably rain us to death, not get cold, but we wanted to be responsive during the winter. And so that's why we wanted to move with that separately. But I would like to bring forward and have a work session with you about some of the transitional housing code changes that we have come up with. And we're also learning a lot as we move through the housing code work process. And so my thinking was that once the code is on its way to adoption, that we would engage with council around a discussion on transitional housing. That's, you know, I think, like I said, there's just some clarifications that need to be made in that, because we really just want to make it efficient. We want to clarify that permanent shelter type housing is something that we as a city, you know, support, but the CSU process really helps set the parameters for that. It helps us do the public engagement around it through the noticing processes. And it seems to be a place in which that we can address that, that issue. So it's come up quite a few times. And so I just wanted to bring it up and to offer a chance for y'all to provide feedback or comments to me on that and how we can try to address what your goals are with respect to that. I'll take that as you want me to come back and talk to you about it another time. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, we do have the Annie Ross House, which is the only family shelter in all of Clackamas County, and meets, or as of 2 years ago, was meeting about 10% of the need.
Right.
I'm guessing right now it's meeting less than that. So, you know, it's a big need. If we can come up with solutions to meet that, I'm all in.
Well, and I think the biggest piece, Mayor, is it's probably a good idea to have a couple of the nonprofits and to have the county sit at the table with us while we talk about this, because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a process that works for them and leads them to being able to implement their charge. So we haven't reviewed this with them. We haven't talked to them about whether or not this is a barrier even right now, but we do know that you all stand for this. And so we wanted to make sure that we at least had a conversation on air about whether or not there's a better connection and making sure that our land use is not a part of the problem.
So just because you brought it up as a heads up, there are some really significant staff changes happening at H3S over the next month or two.
Sounds like I'll be talking to you offline.
I would really appreciate, I definitely think we need to, I want to make sure that this conversation and anything that even comes to council, and maybe there's not, I don't know if there's time between now and then, but definitely the folks who have gone through this process in the city and definitely, I'm sure they could identify barriers and things that made it more difficult for them to get this in place. I mean, we know that from the history of the Annie Ross House.
Absolutely.
So
if there are others, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure there are others. I'm sure there are other people who would have input on what, on what, improvements that need to be made to our process to make sure that we're not creating barriers for this very much needed housing in our community.
If you have specific people you'd like us to reach out to, that's really all I'm asking for. So we do have a list of the individuals we know about that we've worked on permits for the last couple of years, but those aren't all of them. So just please, anyone who has someone who you think has some good insight around this, or even people who are developing outside of Milwaukee, but are developing and can talk about what land use has worked well for them or hasn't worked in other communities would also be really useful.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. And Angel, yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, like I said, it's just like us sharing what we learned on CET. It'd be great if there's certainly lessons that folks have learned. So what we'll intend to do is in the second half of the year, in the first part of the fiscal year, we'll start tracking down this. We'll work on it in the interim as we can, but we have we have some draft code language. I think the direction I'm hearing today is good, is we should test some of that new language with folks who've gone through our process and see, does this make any difference? Yes, great. No, okay, what can? So we can do a little bit of our homework in advance, and then come to you for a work session. We'd likely need to go, I've talked to Vera, but there's planning commission and then you all, but I think from a policy level, we can come and have a work session with you before we even start trekking down the path through planning commission, just to make sure that we're heading down the right path. But I wanted you to know that we've been thinking about this for a long time. I actually have a red line version of the code. Things just changed a little bit, but we didn't lose track of it. And we really hear you, and we want to honor that. And we want to honor it for the reason that you do. It's super important. Okay. So that's it. Those are my goals. Just a little bit of stuff we'll be doing next year. I'm gonna try to get all of it done. I think we will.
So I just want to, I've said this a couple of times, I want to reiterate, let's keep our eye on the process with Hillside, and if we're seeing any red flags at all, please reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, when Steven left, I connected with their project manager, and I reach out to her often. I just can't say enough about how awesome my team is, but planning has just been great about, I think they got their supplemental, they got the materials they needed to make their application complete, and it was done in a day. But thank you. We will certainly continue to do that.
I guess I would ask, I thought this was a good discussion tonight. But what has come up for me is that there are some things that not all of us on council know about, that some on council apparently know about. So I'd not heard about what Providence may be doing until the mayor sent out a letter yesterday or the day before. It seemed like there was another example too. But anyway, I think it's just important that maybe we all be kept abreast of these things. And like Hillside, I haven't heard anything on Hillside except the mayor said something in a meeting a few weeks ago, but I really haven't heard anything on Hillside in forever. So
just so you know, Counselor, in some cases we don't know. So in some cases we do know, and in some cases until we have a pre-app in, we just don't know. And in some cases staff hasn't thought to call one of us and say, hey, this is the thing. So please know that our intention is for you to know these things. We absolutely want you to know these things, but I can't commit that I will always know these things. For some reason, the mayor seems to have the phone number of some people that I do not have the phone number of, and hears things that I simply don't hear. So, but yes, it's a fair request, and I think it's absolutely appropriate.
Well,
yeah, call me anytime, Mayor.
On that little, on the cottage cluster concept, that's really early stages right now. They're trying to get a partnership. It's the university, and trying to get a partnership with the Forest Service to do this sort of demonstration project of those cottages. The concept is that they would go up a whole lot faster, use a whole lot less materials, be able to be easily very efficient, probably net zero for sure, passive, and come in at workforce levels, even though it's a private developer building. So, but it's super early days. They don't even have for sure the concepts wired down on the construction style yet. But that's why they were needing a letter, was to try and get some help from the Forest Service, because it's part of the tall timbers, or what do they call that?
Mass timber.
Mass timbers, sort of bailiwick of the world. But if it happens, it would be a game changer, because it could really allow cottages for sure to go up super fast and quite a bit less expensively.
I just wanted to clarify that the Providence project I mentioned was something that I learned about at a North Clackamas Chamber of Commerce meeting last week, I think. And that is a completely different project. That is to provide housing units for seniors 55 and older who are having compromised health and are, I think half of it was 30 AMI percent income and below, and the other half was 60 AMI and below. So it's really serving the most vulnerable and putting them literally upstairs from wraparound services. And I know the planning department's been working closely with them on this. It was a great presentation, and I was really excited to hear that this is happening. So, but it is not the same thing that we just received the letter from the mayor about.
It's much more likely to be built sooner. That'd be my bet.
Yeah. And they've been in touch with us as well, but they haven't submitted I talked to their development director, but they haven't submitted a pre-app or an application. And that's usually something, Councilor Beatty, that we get a lot of inquiries about a lot of things, and sometimes some stick and some don't. And so when I see you in person, I can gossip with you about stuff, but typically don't put things in print unless they're, which I know you would never ask us to do otherwise, but that's why the Providence folks have been talking to many. I connected them with the county, and but I was only aware of the senior housing one. So this is news to me too. So feel free to call me anytime if you know stuff you want to be aware of, Mayor.
Yeah, the senior one has been kicking around in various iterations for probably 4 years.
Yeah.
So again, it's changed a lot or back and forth. So it is, I get a lot of phone calls, and if I passed on all of those, you guys would think there were 1,000 new units being planned for tomorrow. And it's never the case.
So are there any other questions about where we are with the housing piece? I really appreciate that Layla came tonight and provided this update. I would like to do some minor tweaks to your resolution, just because we're going to be passing a resolution in a month anyway, and I think it makes tons of sense to have it cleaned up. So we're simply going to remove the word draft, and we may or may not remove the word emergency, just because what we're talking about is maybe not tying to an emergency for some of your actions. So those are the two changes you could expect to see if we go down this path. Are there any concerns with that? Okay.
No concerns with that, but what is the status of whether we're going to get rid of, just adopt the 90-day notice?
So Layla's been digging in on that, and we are going to come back and give you a full update, but it has been messier than we expected, and it will add another half an hour to tonight's conversation. So I would recommend we not go down that path if we want to talk about Marine Board. And I know you all are trying to also get to a second meeting tonight if you can, or for at least a portion of it. So if you're okay, we will come back, we will present that information to you, and we will talk through this before you have to go through the process of adopting anything. But it was more complicated than we had realized.
It's never a dull moment. Okay, well, thank you for your time and your attention and your thoughtful feedback. And Councilor Nicodemus, welcome to the team. We're psyched you're here. I look forward to working with you, all of you, over the next year to get this list done. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Layla, thank you, and Christina and everybody else. It's, when I look at the years that have gone by, this has been a goal since day one for me. And it is sometimes really important to reflect on how much we're doing and how much groundwork we've put in that's actually, because we don't see the units, they're not there yet. So it can feel really, it can feel like we're not doing enough. And so it's just, I really appreciate that you've highlighted this for us. And I hope that your team also takes those moments every once in a while to feel good about the work. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. You all have done a lot, and I'm glad that you see it too. So thanks for that.
Yeah, great work, team, everybody. Thank you.
Well done. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Hi.
All right, Lisa, do you want to lead us off on the guess, Kathy?
Could we take a super quick break?
30 seconds. I'm kidding. What do you need? A couple of minutes? Just-
Yeah, I mean, truly a quick break. I need to stand up and I need to get a drink of water. So.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Lisa,
So do you, oh, there she went. Oh,
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna ask if you're fine leading the conversation on the,
I'm fine kicking it off. Yeah, I'm fine kicking it off. There are questions, you know. I haven't really structured any kind of questions, but the questions are largely in the document or in the email that Luke sent us.
do you plan to share your screen or anything like that, Lisa?
No,
No.
I have-
Okay.
no.
well, I think, you know, I think what you wrote was really good. I think it was a very impressive letter, and it hit all the points, and it felt like the right amount of cross between professional and tough. So I think, yeah, and you know, let's worry about the sheriff's office ability to enforce when we get there. I mean, how we might be able to talk, you know, make a deal with Multnomah that, you know, all they got to do is drive their boat an extra mile. If they're at that end of the thing anyway, so we might be able to make a deal with them to enforce for us for a while or something. But I think it's more important that we get it passed, and you know, all the things you wrote about how they should have been reaching out. I'm almost of the mind that should they opt not to do it, that we maybe at least faint at
The lawsuit. Well, we'll talk about that. I thought Justin was maybe going to be on here. Is he not calling in?
He's at Planning Commission tonight.
Oh, okay.
Do you need me to ask him to jump over, or are you okay? Okay.
Not even 3 minutes.
good job. Desi, are you there?
Yes.
There he is. Hey, cool. So we're going to talk about the process that the Marine Board has been going through without us for almost 2 years, I guess. And we're trying to interject and change their outcome. Or at least that's the thought that Lisa and I have. But Lisa has dug really deeply into this and wrote the letter, so I'll let her take it from here.
Okay, well, I'll come back. I mean, you know, I didn't get any feedback from anybody on the letter, but, you know, there's still time to do that. We have to put it on the agenda on Friday, I guess, in the packet on Friday for next week. the so I will say the Marine Board, I think this all grew out. So Portland was doing what they call their South Reach plan, which is sort of everything from downtown south, and it's a land use plan. It's like our map, kind of our plans around areas, central Milwaukee or whatever. And that out of that came the discussion of this. Of the wakes and the zones and the use of the river. It's really separate because Portland doesn't control the river, but they created a working group. I don't know if anybody else went to their website, but I did, and I looked at who was on the working group. The working group launched in late 2019, and I think it only actually met twice, maybe. Advisory committee, it's called. It did have a lot of people from Portland. It had representatives of some of the groups that I would have hoped would have alerted us to this, like Travis from Willamette Riverkeeper and Bob Salinger from Audubon and Willie Levinson from Human Access Project. And unfortunately, none of them, as well as the Marine Board or NCPRD, saw fit to tell us about that.
Yeah.
NCPRD did apparently get consulted at some point about damage and said, whatever they may have said about the dock. And, that was their worry, was the dock in Milwaukee Bay Park, which we do know is an issue in high water. That's why they pull it out of the river. Anyway, so they've gone through this process. They will, if adopted as written, the rule will push a lot more people down our way. I think it basically says that boats from Waverly Marina, whoever knew there was anything called Waverly Marina, but apparently it's now so known, didn't even exist like 3 years ago. From Waverly Marina to downtown Portland is what they call a pass-through zone, meaning a motorboat can go it can go faster than no wake. It can make a wake, but it can't tow anybody. It can't do what they call towed water sports, and it can't do that wake surfing thing. So that means all those people who park at Willamette Park and want to do that are going to be coming here. It also probably increases the pressure on our already existing parking problem, because why would you, if you have a motorboat and you want to ski, why would you pay to park at Willamette Park and have to take your boat 2 miles south to get to water where you could ski when you can park in Milwaukee and not pay and, not have to go so far in your boat? So, I think it's going to create pressures on us in lots of ways. And already, even absent this, we had said in our comp plan that we wanted to create a safer Milwaukee Bay for all users. So I guess I'm ultimately, I sent everyone the comments that Luke obtained from the sheriff's office, and I really appreciate him doing that. I think that guy said, he said he didn't see it changing. He thought it was a done deal. He didn't use those words, but I do think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be really hard to get it to change. I think the Marine Board is probably going to tell us we can't, we can do a separate rulemaking on this later, but, we didn't have it in our proposed rule and we can't do it now. And so as a strategy, and I've talked a little bit about this with Justin, first off, their failure to notify us and involve us isn't like a clear violation of a requirement. It certainly runs against, certain policies, but it's not sort of, I don't think, we're necessarily in lawsuit territory here. That said, but they're going to say, oh, we can't change it because it wasn't in our proposed rule. It's a simple change. It's not even that many words that we have to change to get, to get a quiet zone or no wake zone in Milwaukee Bay. But
Lisa, I don't want to totally derail you, but my recollection when they were soliciting comments on the South Reach was that the zone considered in the rulemaking initially extended all the way down to the west side of Milwaukee Bay Park. Not the park, but the opposite shore of the bay.
Right, right. Well,
Okay.
that's the South Beach plan, which is a different, I mean, that's, I don't know if we could add an argument based on that or not, but was Portland's plan versus what the Marine Board is now doing, right? So they're
Okay.
really two separate things.
Okay. Yeah, this got really confusing for me because the names are the same, but we're talking about something different.
Right, right.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that's Portland's plan, the South Reach that hugs the west side of the river, because that's all, Multnomah County over there, even if not Portland. But anyway, I guess what I, kind of bottom line, what I want to get to is we can push for them to, and it's kind of where I go at the very end of the draft letter. We could push for them to adopt a no-wake zone. And I think ultimately, if they don't want to do it, which I think they may not, I think there will, so let me also say, I participated in Marine Board hearings like 10 years ago or 12 years ago when they were creating a no wake zone around Ross Island in what's called the Holgate Channel on the backside of Ross Island. And they were very loud and contentious hearings in Portland City Hall or wherever it was. The motor boaters come out in force. Now, at the hearing in December where the mayor and I testified on Zoom, they weren't out in force. But I have to expect they will be, both in written comments and probably in this next hearing next week. And if we start talking, if they hear Milwaukee wants to push the line further south, I think there's going to be a huge backlash to that. So, which is not to say we shouldn't do it. I mean, I do think we should do it, but I just want to have a realistic understanding of, what we're up against. I think it will be hard to convince people, to convince the Marine Board, who really do see motorized boaters as their clientele more than other river users. But what they might do, I mean, because I think they do have some vulnerability in both the lack of notice and also the lack of discussing erosion, is they might pull their rule and reissue it in a few months and have cleaned those things up, right? So that's, that's one thing that could happen. And I think Justin saw that as, definitely a possibility of how they would react rather than deny outright or adopt this rule outright, that they might just come out with a different rule in a couple of months. Who knows? Anyway, that's kind of the overview. If there are particular parts of the letter people want to talk about, or particular parts of I mean, I've kind of pretty well documented where things came from. I'm hoping to get a little more on erosion. I've reached out to a few people, but I haven't gotten a lot on that. As noted in the letter, the map that I sent you that was done by Nick in GIS was just really, I don't know that we have to send that. It was really, I wanted to know how much of the shoreline was in the parks. Well, I had asked him two questions. What's the mile marker at the south edge of Milwaukee? And the 19.3 is a close ballpark. And the second thing was, how much of our shoreline is in either Milwaukee Bay Park or Spring Park and Elk Rock Island? And that it amazingly came out like right at 50%. That's why he did all those segments on that map, if that was not clear. So I don't know that we need to send that map. That was really for our own information, that I wanted to know how how much of the shoreline was in parks, but anyway, that's where we are. Parts of the letter people want to talk about, comments.
There's a couple minor typos that I'll flag for you that you probably have already noticed, but I'll send.
Okay. Thank you. If anybody, there is a little part in the middle where I say, you know, testimonials, hope to insert testimonials here. If any of you know people who've had near misses, you know, I would love to get, I got a great story from Linda Blue, but it was down at Willamette Falls. It was very scary. And it was down at Oregon City. It wasn't here. So
we will put, Lisa, if you can send that to us for Friday, we'll put it on to the consent just so that it's approved under everyone's signature. We'll make sure everybody has a chance to review it. If there are any testimonials, I'm sure you can amend it if you want to pull off consent and just add any additional language that you want to do on that day. That's not a big deal. And we'll have it ready to go. Does that work?
sure. Do people not have any parts of it they want to talk about? We're ready. We're going to go with it the way I've written it.
Counselor Nicodemus looks like he's really got a lot of things that he wants to talk about on this, but otherwise, I'm not seeing anybody's comments. So I think generally it looks like you have consensus.
Okay. Well, all right. All right. Well, if anybody does have comments, try to send them to me by like tomorrow night so that I have Thursday to kind of do cleanup, and then Friday I can get it to Scott so it can go in the packet. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Well, that was
painless. Anything else that needs to be said? All right. I think Counselor Nicodemus and I have another meeting to hop on. So thank you all. Good job.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks so much for putting all the work into this. Mark and Desi, will you just let us know what comes out of that if there's anything we need to know about? Thanks.
thanks, Luke.
I got a question for you.
Okay, hold on just a minute.